And I call the honourable member for Bowman.
Deputy Speaker, thank you. And you could almost be forgiven, having listened to that previous speech, that there hasn't been any recognition from the opposition that we have probably one of the highest quality childcare systems in the world, that it balances affordability and access and the needs of vulnerable children. There's no doubt all systems can be improved, and there's no doubt that what the Coalition inherited was a system in stress, and I'll go into a little bit more detail later. I guess what's a little more concerning is that the Shadow Minister actually sat down with time remaining, ran out of material, and virtually exclusively read off notes and spoke with virtually no departure from them. And having been in this portfolio now for 4 years, you would hope that she would be in a position to speak contemporaneously about this area, and it's a breathtaking display that she still can't do that to this day. Look, we want the highest quality childcare in the world, there's no doubt about that, and we have to cater for the 24/7 needs of families, mostly young families of course, who are moving between the need for occasional, the need for long day care, in some cases choosing family-based day care as well. And of course, for a fast-moving economy, we're going to have to respond to the needs of our skilled workers and be able to make sure that at no time seeking out access to childcare becomes a barrier to entering the workforce. But in many cases, we still do tend to forget that childcare is genuinely about preparing the child for school as much as it is freeing up the parents to be able to enter the workforce. So childcare operators and those staff do a brilliant job balancing those competing needs. And there will be no easy solutions, Deputy Speaker. I mean, as you can well understand yourself as a new father, there are always the needs to balance of affordability, the viability of the service, and of course remuneration for the staff that work there. But what we saw over the last 6 years when Labor had a chance to improve the childcare system, I think almost everyone could agree that apart from a well-meaning but failed attempt at a quality framework, the situation in childcare barely changed over that 6-year period. And the legislation that we consider today, quite rightly so, looks at the childcare benefit thresholds, looks at the limit on the childcare rebate and proposes 3-year freezes on those amounts. And the opposition has devoted almost all of their attack to the childcare benefit, mindful that about 1 million families that are eligible for childcare payments will be, on average, seeing a change of around $230 to $300 per person per year. But that compares to the $3,500 increase in fees that we've seen under the Labor administration for that same child. We're talking about an absolute drop in the ocean compared to the loss of control over fees that we saw under the Labor administration. So what do we have here? We have a childcare sector of $28.5 billion. We've got a commitment from the Coalition to look at occasional daycare that was cut by Labor. We've got a determination to make long day care quality and professional development available to all 44,000 educators, all 6,000 childcare centres, and not embark on what I think was the most shameful piece of social welfare policy that I certainly had seen for a number of years, and that was Labor's early years quality fund that basically siphoned money to union-friendly applicants. And this was your classic childcare pinata, where Labor filled it with money, lined up all of their own mates, mostly large providers, and enabled them to have first bite at the cherry. And you almost saw this unseemly display of childcare providers in the know scrambling for the dividends, while smaller operators who didn't realise that they had only 13 hours to put in their application, otherwise they missed out. And in Bonner, and in Bowman, in every electorate around this country, well-meaning, committed childcare operators missed out completely because they were not in the know and not in a position to apply. It was unseemly, and as has already been independently identified, was really used as a membership drive for the unions to set up enterprise bargaining agreements which quadrupled over the period of that fund. It was shameful, it's embarrassing. You'd hope that no government would stoop to that level, but in fact they have. Now the opposition's main attack, of course, is on low-income earners, and it's only right that this place focuses on the needs of low-income earners. But, like all payments in Australia in a developed economy, yes, they taper. I don't think that's news. And if you're earning $41,907 right up to that threshold at around 97,632, you'll see a tapering of the childcare benefit, but in many cases also eligible for the childcare rebate. Exquisitely balanced, works very well. Yes, we'd all like more, and if we're getting $1 less this year than last year, I guess you could say you're worse off. But I think everyone appreciates the bigger picture, Deputy Speaker, that we have inherited a massive debt, due explicitly and uniquely and completely to the work of the former Labor Treasurer and his inability to balance the books, despite all the promises about one day returning to surplus. And so, yes, it's true, there is a tightening of the belts, and we will see that in childcare as well. But as I've pointed out before, it's between 5 and 10%, the burden on families, of the total fee change that we saw over the 6 years of the Labor government. A 53% increase in childcare fees over the 6 years, $3,500 a year, $75 a week for the average parent per child in childcare. And that is a significant increase which Labor never got their hands around. Now, of course, they were full of promises, Deputy Speaker, full of promises about the 53 cents a day that would be the likely increase in fees as a result of their quality framework. But despite the well-meaning efforts of a minister out of control and out of her depth, what happened was obvious. They created barriers for staff, they raised the requirements too quickly and made it virtually impossible for a lot of these providers on the margins to remain viable. So what did we see? We saw hundreds of providers unable to meet those guidelines, applying for waivers, and then we had the ridiculous situation where the Labor government was happily collecting $100 off these providers simply when they applied for a waiver. Now, the common sense approach to this was, of course, to be more flexible, but it was a word not in the vocabulary of the then Labor government, who, of course, brooked no variation. I'm delighted that the Coalition has streamlined and simplified this approach. They've allowed a 3-month probationary period for staff before they embark on training. And most importantly, they've offered flexibility for remote and rural providers who operate in a completely different space, who in many cases can't always rely on being fully occupied, and even in areas out of metropolitan Australia, in areas like my own electorate, there are definitely an oversupply of quality providers, and occupancy rates sit at around 70%. That is a significant impact on viability, and it makes it even harder for these providers to be able to adhere to the requirements of the National Quality Framework. Let's get one thing straight. That quality framework does not get diluted. We support fully high-quality staff working in childcare, but we also understand that these are small businesses who need time to adapt to new regulations and time to bring them into force. And the workers themselves need time to make those arrangements to gain those skills. Look, I've been really distressed by what I think has been an inordinate focus on millionaires, and I've said this before. I've challenged Labor to come up with a millionaire who's in her late 20s or early 30s, who might be having a child at the moment, that doesn't work for a corporation that already gives them wage replacement, or isn't a senior public servant who already gets wage replacement. And to see the very Labor MPs that sit down here and moan about the PPL scheme proposed by the Liberal National Coalition. These were the same union reps who barged into workplaces insisting on, yes, paid parental leave for their union members. And did one of those union members ever say, oh, we wanted the minimum wage, we only want it for 18 weeks, and by the way, forget about superannuation? Oh, no, no, no. The unions were right up to their eyeballs wanting wage replacement for their union members. That's right. And that's exactly what they get in the public service. It's exactly what they get if they work in this building, was wage replacement. That's exactly what they were chasing at every union meeting. Wage replacement and not a minimum wage. So I still challenge the Labor opposition to find me that millionaire. Find me the millionaire who stands to benefit from this arrangement, that doesn't already work for a corporation or a large company that provides them with PPL, or works already in a high position in the public service that enjoys, yes, wage replacement. Of course, it's laid bare, isn't it, that hypocrisy. The only problem with the Coalition's PPL scheme for Labor is that we proposed it. I mean, that's their problem, isn't it? And that's why they are utterly focused on the search for a millionaire, rather than the realisation that for every parent who decides to have a child who's earning more than the minimum wage, we say to them, no, we look them in the eye and we say, you are worth your wage while you go and do the most important of things for the nation, and that is to have a child. And if you have set up your financial arrangements in your household on that wage, you can rely on a coalition government to continue that for 6 months and to provide you with the superannuation that you will need in your retirement. And that's why we found the cut price Labor scheme not only obnoxious, but completely out of line with any other proposal, bar one, in the OECD. So let's remember that. We have a Labor government that over 6 years could not stop the double drop-off. I mean, do you remember all the promises around that, the hundreds of millions of dollars that was going to lead to 222 childcare centres built right next to schools? I mean, every person in their right mind said, gee, that'll be great, right next to my school. Now, you'd think that a Labor government, presented with a job no more complex than spending money, could have pulled that off. But no. I mean, we appreciate that bringing in a tax can be tricky. We appreciate that doing a major reform can present one with challenges. Getting legislation through this building may. But it was just a bucket of money and all they had to do was build childcare centres. Deputy Speaker, is there a simpler job in public life than spending money to build childcare centres? I mean, probably the easiest piece of contract management you can dream of. Well, they got to, out of 222, they got to 38, ran out of steam and quietly cancelled the double drop program on the second page of one of those perennial Kevin Rudd press releases. Now, of course, we know that the quality framework became a problem for the Labor government. We know the double drop-off was something that was just too hard. And then to put the icing on the cake, they cancelled occasional care. Only, a relatively modest amount that looks after people who are particularly in regional areas and working in highly variable occupations where they may need childcare at very short notice. You would have thought that'd be right at the frontier of an adaptable and flexible childcare system. And you think that $13.8 million committed to that area would be money truly well spent, because we all have to accept that we don't have the same living arrangements, and some people who work in grazing or fruit picking or a highly mobile profession may well need at very short notice with their shift work childcare. But of course that was a bridge too far and too complex for no other reason than it didn't suit the unions, so that fund was chopped. Well, it comes back under the coalition. Look, in conclusion, I think the most vivid image that policymakers will have of Labor in childcare, apart from a rote-read speech from the Shadow Minister, will be that shameful display of the money grab for the Early Years Quality Fund. Many of my centres called me on the day of application for me to simply say, I hope you have your application in. It has been independently reviewed as a sham. The Auditor General, I hope, will look at it in great detail. And the money that was honoured by the coalition government that had already been committed was in fact delivered, and that remained will be directed into looking after long day care professional development. Now, you can't ask for anything more than that, can you? The idea that we will support the providers around the country in the 6,000 centres an opportunity to increase their skills. It's an impressive approach to engage the Productivity Commission. I mean, just how hard is it to make a phone call, to send an email to the Productivity Commission in this most complex area of childcare before we dive into any of these policies? Why not engage the Productivity Commission? But it was anathema to the other side. No way will we in any shape or form engage the Productivity Commission. A complete scotoma to the very good work that that agency could have done. And it was the coalition government that proposed it then in opposition, and for no other reason than it was our idea, fiercely resisted by the other side. Disappointing. Evidence it was the right thing to do? 1,000 submissions to that inquiry, half of them online. We'll get some fascinating insights into this most complex of sectors. I don't pretend for a moment that fees are not and out-of-pockets are not a significant challenge. But as many investigations have shown in the past, the out-of-pockets are in many cases nowhere near as high as made out by opponents of the sector. We go on, we know that there is a certain charge and certain cost that we have to assign to highest quality childcare, looking after vulnerable children and making sure that all Australian children by the age of 5 are ready for school. This sector does an enormous job. It will benefit from the coalition policies and benefit more so by seeing the failures of Labor fade into the rear vision mirror.